Welcome to another edition of a week in your life in the astrology world. It never ends. It constantly goes. If there's one thing you're going to do watching YouTube astrology videos or the books that you're reading and the apps that you're scrolling, know that the clock never stops. Like there's multiple cycles upon cycles and they just keep going. So here we are, the week of October 6th, another week in your life, my life, everyone's life. Do we hope for the best? We try. We try. We hope for the best. So I'll talk about some of the transits this week. There's some push-pull happening this week. The inner body planets like Mars and Venus have a story, right? And then we have some of the bigger planetary bodies that make different kinds of moves this week that feels like a push-pull situation, okay? So saying that, I'm doing this video on Sunday. I'm still in the Scorpio moon that I'm doing this. Thankfully, those who watched my weekend recap, I talked about the amazing water trine that happened this weekend that could help with the eclipse story that happened last week, that still continues this week, by the way. But there was an emotional place, an emotional weekend, a place of processing that comes out of the air sign Libra eclipse that we have, and we get into a more embodied feeling and trying to figure out what's happened. The end of this weekend, we've had Mercury get in a caustic relationship here with Mars, and we're coming out of it, right? So Mars in Cancer, Mercury in Libra, they're in cardinal signs. There's been some truth-telling this weekend, truth-telling to oneself. A lot of truth in the last week with the eclipse of certain realities of goodbyes in the Libra and Aries parts of your chart, especially if you're an Aries or a Libra. I know because I've been getting the messages, seeing the emails, so on and so forth. It does continue this week, but there's a shift. And this watery weekend where we can find some sort of healing in the processing space and the embodied approach to what is happening continues. And when we get to Tuesday here, October 8th Pacific time, we perfect a harmonious relationship between Mars and Venus. And we sure do need this, considering that Mars and Venus are the rulers of the North and South Node in Libra and Virgo, and we're the rulers of Scorpio and Taurus for the last couple years in the eclipses. So we've had almost 3 years of eclipses that were predominantly based in Mars-Venus stories, relationships, fighting, bonding, orgasms, and happiness. And we get a little bit of that this week going up to Tuesday here. So basically at 3:21 a.m. Pacific on October 8th, we have Venus trine Mars. I am so used to saying like square opposition Mars stories and stuff like this. It feels so good to say like, oh, Mars and Venus are trine. They're getting along. They're trying to get along, especially if because of the narratives that have been going on in Mars Venus stories, Libra Aries stories, because of the eclipses. This is a mutual exchange. We could start there. I'll put it to Mars and Cancer here at 18 degrees, and you could see here when I find Venus. Where are you, Venus and Scorpio? There at 18 degrees, and we have this harmonious water trine, which we got a hint of coming out of this weekend because the moon being in Scorpio, but here it perfects. This is an oasis. This is a place where I would say bonding happens, if you can believe this. There's like a bonding ritual that can happen, especially in water signs, and it's passionate. Venus and Scorpio, we know, is sensual and passionate, and it's about pure intimacy here, one-on-one intimacy, and what comes along with that emotionally. And Mars in Cancer craves that also in a sense in its comfy home in Cancer, and pushing those places of the need of safety and security. And by having safety and security, vulnerability is there, and vulnerability, you have trust. And Venus and Scorpio is all about establishing trust so one can be intimate in the deepest type of way. So Mars and Venus here, as we move till Tuesday, have this great exchange, pleasant exchange, emotional and somatic experience too within the body, because we're dealing with water, and the movement of what's trapped emotionally in the body comes out and flows here. It literally could mean coming out. Yes, I just said that. So, passionate, harmonious, bonding ritual between Mars and Venus and water signs happens. Now, it's interesting because also brewing here, we just came out of this Mercury and Libra squaring Mars, right? And then we have this beautiful ritual that's happening here. And at the same time, on October 8th, Mercury then continues the story. And I'm telling you, all of you people who are watching these videos, you're new to me here. You go watch my live streams, go check it out, subscribe, right? Now, you'll know that I preach a lot about Mercury because I think Mercury just carries the stories for us. That's what it does. It's the messenger. And whatever it is, whether it's making an amazing relationship to another planet or not, it's always clear with Mercury, even during Mercury retrogrades. And so here, Mercury now continues the story. It squared Mars off this weekend, caustic conversations coming out of the eclipse, right? And then we have here at 5:22 a.m. Pacific, we have Mercury trine, harmonious trine with Jupiter in Gemini. Let's just show it to you. I get to point out. I'll still use this chart here. You'll see Jupiter at 21 degrees right here, and then we'll look at Mercury here at 21 degrees. We have a Mercury-Jupiter trine in air signs. Now, it's very important to look at this 21 degree place, especially with Jupiter, because we'll get to that in a second. You'll know why. But listen, Jupiter brings hope and optimism, buoyancy. It wants to most of the time. Okay, that's the textbook definition. Mercury has to do with communication, right? And Mercury being in Libra after everything it's been through here, last couple months of a retrograde, then part of the massive eclipse goodbye story in Libra, and then squaring Mars, and here's Jupiter. So it has some buoyancy here. And at the same time, we know that Mars and Venus are in a harmonious trine that day, or perfecting that. We take this day, even on a Mars day. We take it because of so much caustic activity, so much challenge, so much ending narratives. So here, Mercury and Jupiter bring buoyancy of thought and of vision, right? There's some faith. There's something that we can aspire to in our minds, at least to try to balance current narratives, right? That are intense. So we have that in air signs, but I wish it was that simple. I wish it was that clean. And so basically, I'll get to the part that's a little odd about this, but I'm also going to point out in this chart something else that Mercury does that day. But this is not the so clean part, is basically Mercury here's at 21. If any of you are following the Chiron story at 21 degrees in Aries, know that Mercury is going to have an opposition to Chiron here the same day. And so there is some sensitivity and a little bit of hurt going on here. And this is total eclipse stuff here. This is Libra and Aries. This Chiron story too in Aries, you can go all the way back to the massive eclipse that we've had here earlier in the spring that was pretty visual in a lot of the United States. Remember, it was April 8th. It was back then. For those of you who are Aries and Libra or have planets there back then and even now, this is part of the conversation, and it's a touchy subject here. And Mars is kind of in this story a little bit too, because it's also in a cardinal sign, kind of around, and it's still raw coming out of the eclipse week. I suggest that if one is going to communicate about wounds, about pain, and about certain types of honesty, that you take the water approach to all this, where it's not just about words. It's how can one relate to another. And if we were going to use Mars and Cancer and Venus and Scorpio that day that's flowing, we want to stay in a safe, contained, intimate place that encourages and feeds vulnerability in a positive way. And in those places, the sensitive conversation can continue. And I think that's the key part of all this. The buoyancy of Jupiter, that day too with Mercury, one can even come out of the conversation with like, okay, we're working on this, and I heard what you said, and I could feel that you've heard what I said, and that we've expressed ourselves emotionally. Whether it was like a very home-cooked meal, this is a Cancer type of feeling, and it was intimate, and your senses were involved with Venus and Scorpio, and we could feel like we're looking at each other eye to eye, and there is nothing else but this, right? And that we are bonded. And then in that place, we profess. And that is one way for me to use this. But is it still sensitive and touchy this week? It is. So basically that also happens on the 8th. And when we get into the 9th here, then we have something that is, I think, crucial here, especially if you are a Gemini. And you probably, as a Gemini or Gemini rising, got Gemini planets, didn't know this was, I was going to say it this way, but this is what it's about this week. On October 9th, Jupiter in Gemini will station retrograde and then go backwards for a month here. And, you know, Jupiter's been steamrolling through Gemini since the end of May, Memorial Day weekend. And it was in June that we had a Jupiter-Venus conjunction in Gemini. We had all this massive Gemini, and it's been kind of the fuel for this summer. And we know the planet that rules Gemini is Mercury, and that's why we've been following Mercury. It's such an important planet here all the way until next June. That's when Jupiter will leave Gemini and go into Cancer, and then it'll be about the moon, right? So I think it's key this week, since we've already had a lot of mercurial situations, that we understand that even though there's a Mercury-Jupiter trine, and there's this need to communicate and to try to feel things out, and also, can we have the vision and the hope and the faith? It's within 24 hours of that Jupiter really stops and starts to do a backward cycle. And I think this is a massive reality check, and will be for Geminis in general, because when any planet goes retrograde and does its retrograde cycle, you start to review. So pretty much anyone who has, you know, planets in Gemini and, you know, in the second decan, and what I mean by this is, like, you know, between, let's say, 12 and 21 degrees or something like that, you're about to go through a massive review period. And, you know, it all depends on your Jupiter and Gemini story that's happened to you. And anybody watching, if you've been affected by this. Let's say you have mutable angles in your chart. I mean, your rising sign is an immutable sign. Saturn and Pisces and Jupiter and Gemini have been affecting you. We had the first Jupiter and Saturn square that happened this summer. That's about the challenge and the vision of Jupiter and Gemini, but Saturn and Pisces limiting that vision and wanting to make that vision reality through work, through boundaries, and a step-by-step process. And that has been very difficult for mutable signs and for mutable angles. But I know there's been moments in there for those who have had Jupiter and Gemini hit parts of their world where you have seen buoyancy, a little bit of luck, some good things happen. Here, when Jupiter goes retrograde, now the real work comes, because you get the vision and the acknowledgement. Now here comes the follow through, and you can't just run on Jupiterian gaseous fumes of hope and optimism and a vision and just to talk because it's in Gemini. You have to back up the talk. You have to back up the vision. And so here Jupiter backs up for months and will force one to tone down the expansiveness of Jupiter and try to use Saturn, I'm giving you a solution here, to put this into concrete form so this vision fulfills itself eventually, right? So a massive day that happens on for the Jupiter story that happens at 12:04 a.m. Pacific on October 9th. I could put that chart up there, couldn't I? I mean, I could do this on the fly since I'm not live streaming. I'll show it to you really quick. You will see Jupiter here at 21 degrees. It's actually been there for a little bit at this degree, and it will. Since it's stopping, it's hovering around this 21 degree place. If you have anything in mutable signs at the degree, this is a poignant moment in a part of the story, a major gateway to the story. It's just a gateway to go back and to review. Remember, and let me show you this chart because I thought I was showing this to you. Here, I will point it out again. I'm not going to do any edits on this video. I'm just going straight through. You'll see 21 degree Jupiter and Gemini here stationing retrograde. So you could see here we actually have a little power-packed week so far. We don't get a break from the astrological transits in the story of your life this week. But no, it's a push-pull situation. You know what's interesting? Is now that Jupiter is going to be retrograde here starting Wednesday on October 9th, and we know that Saturn is too currently retrograde. I'm looking at my notes on my wall. It's going to be November 15th that Saturn will stop its retrograde motion and move forward. So pretty much from October 9th to the 15th, we have Jupiter in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces both retrograde, and they're in this story together. So we're in this kind of space where it's like full breaks. Jupiter's stopping and slowing down. Saturn is slowing down from his backward motion, and they're kind of in this space here. And this is critical because if you can't really push the Jupiter or the Saturn story here is what I'm saying. And once Saturn moves forward on the 15th, it starts to move forward slowly. And when we get eventually in December, we're going to have our second Jupiter-Saturn square is going to happen. It's just going to happen with Jupiter being retrograde and Saturn moving forward. The first square that happened was the opposite. It was Jupiter moving forward and Saturn retrograde. So I want you to get this in your head as a little bonus to understand if you've been affected by these mutable transits and you're a mutable person, that now and the next until the 15th is critical. And I suggest observance and watching. And it just so happens we know this is happening from a mundane political angle. There's a lot going on, right? So speaking of, and let me mention too that Jupiter will actually be retrograde all the way till February 4th, and 2025, and it will go back from 21 degrees Gemini all the way back to 11 degrees Gemini, and then it will start to move forward in February. Well, I wish I could say that's it, but we move through the week. Moon goes into Capricorn on Wednesday. Saturnian-based story now. You know what I'm saying? So Saturn and Pisces is in the background ruling the moon. But then something else happens on the 11th. The moon goes into Aquarius, still ruled by Saturn and Pisces, but it's later on Friday Pacific time, October 11th at 5:31 p.m. that Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn, currently retrograde, it's there right now stopping, stations forward. Now we have another outer body planet here wanting symbolically to move forward. It's definitely not moving forward. It's moving really slow. But if you have been tracking the Plutonian situation or you're affected by this, and let me stop right here and say something. It's really easy to get freaked out on astrology and the fear-based component of forecasts on YouTube and so on and so forth. I could come across and say the reality of Pluto in a sense of what it does, of sometimes obsession and uprooting, and you're going to hear death. Saturn's more death to me, to be honest, but Plutonian regenerative situations. And I think it gets a lot of hype. I get it, but it's a modern astrology planet. It's not there to induce fear in you. Please look at your relationship with Pluto in general, regardless of where it is, and try to stop being freaked out about this planet. Does it show intense situations? It does. It also shows intense, beautiful situations that deal with regenerative things and changes and probing and going deep into something and the truth coming up. It's not all messed up, okay? And so I'm saying this to you for people watching, like, oh, they're not going to pay attention to the other planets. I'm going to pay attention to Pluto. It's doing this. The world's going to end. The world's not going to end, okay? There's times, whatever astrological transit, one can feel that way in their lives. And there's literally that, but it's not Pluto-based is what I'm telling you. If you really want to dial in on endings and certain things like that, you would look to the inner body planets, to be honest. Saturn rules Capricorn. Saturn rules the Pluto and Capricorn situation right now, 29 degrees. Is there an end? Yes, and from a larger cycle space, there is finally an ending here. And it's pretty much on November 19th, on 2024, that Pluto, after starting to move forward slowly, is going to hit 0 degrees Aquarius. That is the end of the cycle finally for Pluto in Capricorn since 2008. Okay, so you take this symbolically. Take it symbolically. Try not to look at it as a literal something that's going to happen in your life. And if it does happen that way of death or an ending, it's not Pluto doing it. I'm most guaranteed it's probably other things in someone's chart. So please, know both sides to all the planets and the signs, and try not to get caught up on the hype and the fear-based part of this. It's interesting I bring this up about fear stuff because of what Saturn does with fear, but in general, celebrate this one. Some people don't want it to leave Capricorn. Some people do. They're going to come up with all their narratives. But in one sense, if one can step out and look like, wow, on a bigger space in the Capricorn part of my chart from 2008 till now, what did happen? And if I was distinctly affected by this, and my chart was, what did I learn? One thing about Pluto is that I know, at least from doing client sessions, when somebody has a major Pluto transit, it's everything and it's nothing in a sense. Everything as in like massive changes happen or can, and at the same time, one sees the chaoticness of life or the, in a sense, randomness of life of how you not have control over things, and one, in a sense, can come to peace of like just stepping out and like, okay, this is what happened, this is what I learned, and this is what I'll take with me into the next phase. And it's a more Saturnian point of view because of Saturn ruling Capricorn, right? And we take that because now that Pluto is going to be in Aquarius for 20 years here for good, it's still a Saturnian situation, as in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And so for the next 20 years, and if you're affected by this part of Pluto being in Aquarius, is you're going to be looking at wherever Saturn is in your chart or wherever it is in the sky, right? To define this, to understand it. But you do have the knowledge since 2008 to bring with you into a next Saturn way of doing things. So I went on a side rant with that. If you're still with me, try not to take it so seriously, okay? Underworld stories are that way. I get it. At the same time, just acknowledge it. Pluto moves forward here on October 11th, 5:31 p.m., and it will hit the 0-degree Aquarius place on November 19th. Okay, so Saturday on the 12th, we got a Aquarius moon touching the Libra sun. This is all air goodness, right? And then we get to the 13th, which is just the next Sunday, at least Pacific time, where I feel that the mercurial story then comes to a place, a true place. We did Mercury square Mars this weekend. And on a Tuesday, we do Mercury trine Jupiter, right? And Mercury, wherever it is, rules Jupiter and Gemini that's stationing backwards here this week. So when we get to Sunday and we wake up on the 13th or 14th for some people, Mercury in Libra then squares Pluto in Capricorn, who's just starting to move forward. And that is the conversation we're brewing for. It's interesting what Mercury's been doing, the messages it's been carrying for the last 2 months. And we get to this place where I think it's the most cutting truth that one can get to, right? We had the expansiveness of the mind earlier in the week with Jupiter, and Jupiter stations to go backwards, so we have to put the brakes on that vision, right? We have to put the brakes on it. We can't just do it yet. And then Mercury runs into Pluto. And, Mercury being in Libra, and it's been tattooed by this eclipse. And I think there's no glossing over in a way that Mercury in Libra has a tendency to do, whether they're negotiating something or seeking justice and balance in harmonious situations through the word, through the conversation. And I think here the brutal truth comes across because Pluto makes it that way. There is no way out if one is still not getting what the eclipse in Libra has done to the Libra part of their chart and the truth that's involved in that place. If you're still avoiding it, if you're still trying to mask it and charm your way to yourself or to other situations, brewing up to this Mercury-Pluto square here on October 13th, it's just no. To me, don't run away from it. You can't run away from Pluto either. It's just going to show you. It's going to show you the poison, So basically, the combination of Mercury Pluto is very probing, can be very obsessive of the mind, be obsessive about relationships here because it's Mercury in Libra. It also can be tricky and obscure the truth too. So one is avoiding and trying to do Plutonian manipulative situations where they're trying to alter it and not really get to the truth, like that opposite side of this. But if we are going to be mercuriously crafty, choose your battle well, because I think when it deals with Pluto, it's karmic. You can't get out of it. It's going to come back to haunt you. So what I'm saying to you is, you work this whole week on what the truth is if you're affected by this Libra Aries eclipse story. Because when you get to this point in time, the deepest truth can come out. And it could be the goodbye is said verbally and not just the goodbye that you've known for a while that you have to like kind of flush out in the Libra part of your chart. It comes out. And the poison comes out and needs to be purged. And that deals with deep, honest conversations. Okay, so it's an ultimatum in the end. And it can be because of what Pluto brings. It's either this or that. It's like life or death, Pluto. It's that like feeling of it. And so I would say ultimatum is the key thing here and theme of the Mercury-Pluto square that happens on the 13th. Within hours, then Mercury leaves that 29-degree place in Libra and enters in the probing, truly now intimate, going within way of Scorpio for an interesting run. And we'll talk about that on other videos, but I actually like this transit, and I think it will be good for many people. So that happens at 12:23. Keywords, you're going to be pinpointed with Mercury and Scorpio. It's going to be the ability to go to the shadow world and to get to the pinpointing and things. And also focus the mind on a couple or one singular thing like a fixed sign can do to get things done in mercurial fashions. Okay, so that's what happens. Moon's in Pisces that day. We have a Chiron Mars square that happens next Sunday, which continues the Chiron story. That's not the most happiest thing, but I do want to point something else out. And it happens later that night on the 13th. And, actually, while I do this on the fly, I'll pull up the chart just to show you and do this. And I think this is an interesting way to end this forecast week. Everything involved, and it actually has to do with Jupiter. Now at this point is retrograde still at 21 degrees, right, that we have here, but it's doing a trine with the 20-degree Libra sun. And I think here this vision of Jupiter and Gemini, in an air social sign and making the connection, harmonious connection with the sun and Libra, let's say for the bigger picture of how we can harmoniously flow together or flow in situations, and what Mercury, what Jupiter and Gemini ruled by Mercury wants this vision to be fulfilled. And now that Jupiter's retrograde, the brakes are on that, but it still doesn't mean that we stop the look of what the vision is and how it's changing and the work that needs to be done. And by looking at the connection to the sun, you have a moment here where you're like, it's a check-in. Okay, I know I have to do Saturnian work to support the Jupiter and Gemini vision, Saturn being in Pisces, mutable place. I know that, okay? We know that. But if we took the bigger picture as into why we're doing Jupiter and Gemini, and what Saturn and Libra wants to do, air signs are social-based signs. It all has to do with mind and the relation to ourselves and what happens in the mind, and then what we do to the outside world. And so here, one can be at least have, even in a retrograde place that Jupiter is in, have a vision that's supported and brings in Venetian qualities to all this for farther down the line. And so we take this situation, we take this future vision, and we save it. And we save it for spring. And because at that point, Jupiter will be moving forward, Saturn will be moving forward, and I think the vision of Jupiter and Gemini actually gets to start to really truly fulfill itself after all the work it's going to do from now, at this point in October, all the way to winter into springtime. So those are my thoughts on this watery weekend. And an interesting week in our lives. I should cue the music here. As in, next time, maybe I'll work on this. I should cue the music. As in, like, every time I do a weekly transit, there's some sort of thing in the background music. Because it is a novella. It is a soap opera that we live in. We're living in opera every day. We look at the myth and archetypes, whether it's Sumerian myth, Greek myth, Roman myth, whatever myths from Africa, from the Caribbean. And they're just these stories that we, as human beings, is the ultimate knowledge, the ultimate reflection of ourselves. These days, we see that in a movie, a Netflix thing, an audiobook, a story, or on this YouTube channel, right? But remember that you are living a drama. You are living a story. And there's peaks and valleys and ebbs and flows. But if you can understand a little bit, let's say using astrology, right? And the characters in the story, you being one of them, myself also, we can just acknowledge that. It's like being in a dream. And then the moment in your dream where you say, I'm dreaming. I could change this. And you change it in your dream. That's how we're really living. According to me, Sparkles of Gold. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching me go on my thing. And remember to hit that bell too, because for my subscribers and people watching, you know I go randomly live. I wonder when I'll do that again. Until next time, I'll see you on the next video.